Well, hello everyone again. Thank you so much for joining us today for the lunch hour Gourdneck State Game Area webinar. My name is Erin Rowan Ford, and I am with Audubon Great Lakes. We're here in partnership with the Wildlife Division of the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, and we're so glad that you're here spending the next hour with us. We're hoping this webinar will be helpful because we know the physical and mental health benefits of experiencing nature are so important for everyone, that vitamin N. And we also know that since COVID-19, people are still spending more time outside and continuing to connect with nature closer to home. We're also committed to sharing information about engaging with public lands and making the outdoors safe and welcoming for everyone. And with spring here and almost summer, our neotropical migrants and secretive marsh birds have returned to Michigan and the Great Lakes, so it's a really great time to get outside and engage with your public lands. So I am Erin Rowan Ford again, and I am the Communications Associate with Audubon Great Lakes. And I manage the My Birds program in partnership with Michigan DNR, which it aims to increase all Michiganders' engagement in the understanding, care, and stewardship of public lands that are important for birds and people. We're a statewide outreach and engagement program, and you can learn more about us by following us on social media. Audubon Great Lakes is a regional office of National Audubon, and we work across the 5 Great Lakes states to restore and protect birds and the places they need to thrive through on-the-ground conservation, advocacy, outreach, engagement, and policy. We have over 215,000 active members across the region, with 43,000 members here in Michigan. We also have over 50 chapters in the region and 2 nature centers. I will be your facilitator today. Monitoring the chat box with Emily's help, and will help to facilitate the Q&A session at the end of the program. Here are just a few housekeeping items before we get started. I'm sure all of you are familiar with Zoom at this point, but this presentation is being recorded and all participants are going to be muted for the duration of the webinar. If you have found the participant or chat functions on the Zoom platform, you can actively participate in the webinar, sending us questions or comments, and introducing yourself in that chat box. Thanks for those of you that are doing that now. We will review the questions you've submitted in the chat box during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Well, here we go. And I am very happy to say we're welcomed today with our guest speaker, Don Poppe, who is the wildlife biologist with Michigan DNR. And Don and I are going to cover all of these things today. The state of the birds, Michigan State Game and Wildlife areas, and then Don is going to dive into all things Gourdneck State Game Area, chatting about the birds and wildlife we can expect to find there, recreational opportunities that the area provides, some habitat management and monitoring that's happening there, and more. And with that, I'm going to get things started. 5 years ago now, I can't believe it's been 5 years, the 3 billion birds gone report came out, which showed that we've lost nearly 3 billion birds across North America. And these were adult breeding birds. Unfortunately, population losses were seen across all bird guilds and habitat types, even some of our invasive species. If you're interested in exploring the report, we'll get a link in the chat. Audubon that same year released our Survival by Degrees report, which showed 389 bird species are on the brink of extinction due to climate change. This includes 55 species of high vulnerability here in Michigan. Some of those species include our beloved common loon and the bobolink, a grassland bird. This slide is showing in red the amount of habitat or range that these birds are going to potentially lose at a 3°C warming scenario. The good news is that our science also showed that if we're able to keep warming at just 1.5°C, we can really help 75% of those birds at risk. And we do have a reason for hope. If we do come together and take action for conservation, we have seen that have a positive impact on some bird populations. Waterfowl, for example, have seen great increases thanks to conservation efforts coordinated with waterfowl hunters and state agencies and federal agencies coming together. Michigan has lost half of its wetlands, but not all wetland birds are thriving. Even some of our specific waterfowl species have some population declines in the Great Lakes region, but overall across North America, we have seen waterfowl increase, which is wonderful. We've also seen raptors and woodpeckers increase due to improved habitat management and policies and regulations that were passed that prevented the continued use of DDT and increased protections for some of these species. So public lands are incredibly important for our remaining birds. Here in Michigan, we have a wonderful state forest and state park system, but we also have over 170 state game and wildlife areas that Michigan DNR owns and manages. These areas are open to the public and managed for multiple uses, but they are also areas where a lot of bird species and rare species thrive. These areas were created to provide exceptional hunting opportunities, but they are also managed to benefit other wildlife, not just those game species. Dozens of these areas also double as Audubon important bird areas. And while these areas are funded primarily by hunter monies, they are free and open to the public to visit, use, and enjoy most of the year. And with that, I'm going to pass things over to Dawn.
Thank you. Let's dive into Gourdneck State Game Area and its history. It is one of the oldest Pittman-Robertson areas, meaning it was acquired with Pittman-Robertson funds from the Wildlife Restoration Act of 1937. So it was one of the first projects to come out of that funding source in 1941. So 83 years now is a pretty good conservation success story. It's a little over 2,000 acres, and we're not really acquiring more land at this point because the location is in the city of Portage. There's not a lot of opportunity for increasing its size. But we have a good mix of forests, wetlands, grasslands. We even have a couple lakes that are part of the game area. So for me, when I think about birds at Gourdneck State Game Area, I think we have a wide array. We don't have any one species that's overly abundant or a group of species that's particularly abundant, but we have everything from open lakes to marshes to forested swamps, and then all the way to dry, sandy oak barrens and prairies. So just to highlight some of the cover types, we have a fairly large grassland that is visible from 131. Out there, you might come across stick thistle or Henslow sparrow, some of our rare grassland nesting birds. We have a wide array of forest bird species. Most of the game area is forested. However, a lot of it is also wetlands. There's a lot of swamp and wet areas. And, I wouldn't expect to find too many shorebirds, but I mentioned that there just to say if, anywhere there's mud flat, you might run into, and I'm losing my, the little sandpiper or a killdeer. We certainly have killdeer, but waterfowl and wading birds would be things you would definitely expect to see there. This is more of the, if you're into water birds, Justin's Marsh is on Shaver Road. There's a couple pull-offs there where you could sit there with your binoculars or a spotting scope and really get a good view of the marsh. This past winter, during the midwinter, I counted over 200 gadwall there. So it's a good area for sure for waterfowl. And, with good wetland zonation along the edges, I would definitely expect to see wading birds and shorebirds. And, if you look in the eBird checklist, I'm sure there's a lot of those species there. But that's definitely a good opportunity. Across the road is Sugarloaf Lake. So you get a good mix of emergent marsh species with that open water lake across the road.
Thanks, Dawn. And out at Gourdneck State Game Area as well, chatting through eBird, it is a great area to explore. It's also not on many bird watchers' radar. So if you do check eBird, you can see there aren't a lot of checklists currently submitted. But the area itself is broken down into these 4 units and hotspots on eBird. So you can explore a couple of trails along the Hampton Lake Trail. While only 18 checklists have been submitted, over 70 species have been detected. But it looks like the main unit and southeast unit have been birded the most with the most species. So we do encourage you, if you are an eBird user, to head out there and submit a checklist of your observations to kind of help fill some of these information gaps, but also to see what else is out there. We're pretty confident there's more than what has currently been detected, as a lot of the checklists are submitted just in May. So it would be really great to get some more eBirders out there submitting data for other times of the year. I'll submit these in the chat for you to explore as well.
So before I get to wildlife, so I don't embarrass myself too much, the shorebirds I was thinking of were spotted sandpipers and solitary sandpipers. Outside of migration, I wouldn't be surprised to see those in areas where we might have a little mud flat just due to dry conditions. But as far as other animals, we have all your common mammals. White-tailed deer are certainly abundant. The city of Portage doesn't typically allow hunting, so being nested in the city there, you can expect that you'll see plenty of deer. One of the highlights is the eastern box turtle. Those can be seen primarily throughout the game area. And there are Blanding's turtles. The rare spotted turtle are kind of high points if you're into reptiles as well. As far as snakes go, common snakes will be there, but the eastern Massasauga rattlesnake, which is a federally threatened species, is pretty significant. We do have a good viable population there on Gourdneck State Game Area that we manage for. And then just your common frogs and toads, nothing particular to note there, but just that we have a good abundance of herp species out there because we do have a lot of wetlands throughout the game area. All right, getting down into the nitty gritty. Here's the map. So this will make more sense for the things I've been talking about to folks, unless you've been out there. But we're located mostly in the city of Portage, which is strange. We're a wildlife state game area for hunting. But when these first parcels were acquired in 1941, the city of Portage was not an incorporated city at that time. Shaver Road was 131. It's since moved to location. So a lot has changed in the last 80 years. But it offers us a good mix and a good opportunity to have people and users come out here and engage with the community. And so if you're looking for like an easily accessible area, those 2 northern units along Center Avenue, fit the bill there, where you can hop right off 131, go down Center Avenue, pull in a parking lot, and you'll be in. Actually, we had trumpeter swans nesting right off Center Avenue this year. So, and they have been for quite a while. I kind of forgot about that. But so you can hop off the freeway right away, see some trumpeter swans, hear some frogs calling. But then if you really want to get back, into some swamps on the north side of Sugarloaf Lake, for example, that main unit, is 2 miles from north to south. So there's the opportunity in this city limits to, really have a wilderness kind of experience and get back there and off the beaten path where folks aren't. We don't have any specific restrictions here. There's no refuges or closed seasons. So from January 1st to December 31st, it's public land, but it is a popular hunting destination. So the big thing I want to point out there is from November 15th through 30th is the firearm deer season. So I would recommend, if you're not deer hunting, to just avoid the area. If you do need to go out there, it's public land, but wear orange. And then the other primary hunting activities would be from October 1st to around January 1st. Folks could be duck hunting, definitely deer hunting, bow hunting for deer. So ways to avoid conflicts with hunters, and the type of conflict I'm talking about is just, somebody's bow hunting and they're getting close to seeing a deer, and then somebody walks down a trail and deer runs away. So if you were to go out during the week, go out during the middle of the day, that avoids the peak hunting times, which are on the weekend and mornings and evenings. As well, we have this state game area map will be key for you to know where the public land is. There's other things available too, like Onyx. That's an app you have to purchase. There's a free application called MI Hunt that you can look at on your phone, and that'll show the state property. And also of note for the birding related things is that we're participating as part of an application to be for the Kalamazoo Urban Bird Treaty. So with our proximity to Kalamazoo, we're a participant because we are managing 4 birds and 4 bird habitat. All right, trails. This is always interesting because everybody wants trails, right? Typically on state game areas for wildlife, we don't have any official designated or dedicated trails because we don't have funding for that type of recreation. So, but what we do have here is most parking lots that you would go to are going to have some sort of trail that's been established over time. So that's always there at every parking lot. But on the northeast unit along Center Avenue, we have a little trail loop that's kind of become established over the years with the neighbors. I mean, we're completely developed around this entire unit. So there's condos on the east side and apartments on the west side. And some of the residents of the condos wanted to adopt a park, and that's the City of Portage's kind of name. So we use that, and they maintain the trail to keep the loop open. So that is a pretty nice loop that is maintained by volunteers. However, we'll talk about it a little more. If you're in Southwest Michigan, you probably know that a tornado went through about a month ago. So a big chunk of this trail is covered with trees right now. But there is another similar type of trail on the northwest unit that's also covered with trees. But we'll be working on that stuff in the future, and I'll talk more about the tornado. So getting into habitat management, and the type of habitat management we do is typically to benefit all wildlife species. We do use a featured species approach that includes birds, but often we're managing for the plant community. So in order to do that, we have to start with an inventory. So as an agency, we typically hire Michigan Natural Features Inventory to inventory all our stand cover types. So that's what those yellow lines you see are dividing lowland deciduous from oak forest, from open shrub scrub stuff, and red pine stands, all those different cover types. Before we can set management objectives, we need to know what we have. So that's how we start. And just generally speaking, for forests, we're managing for that native species that would be there. For a healthy forest, we want to remove invasive species. We want to remove species that aren't appropriate for this latitude. Red pines is an example. They were planted to reforest formerly farmed areas. And then for the grasslands, prairie fens, and oak savannas, a lot of our objectives kind of overlap. And that's we're trying to promote native species, those natural communities, and those native herbaceous plants. So in all those 3 types of communities, typically what you're battling is succession towards woody forest. And so our objectives are to keep and perpetuate those native herbaceous plant species. So some examples, once we've kind of set our objectives for habitat management, some of the treatment tools that we have in our toolbox are here listed. One example is timber management. This picture shows an area that had a pulse for oak savanna, had some remnants with oak savanna plants. It's got black oaks, but around those we had planted in the 1950s red pines. Now red pines down here don't do very well, and they certainly wouldn't be winners in climate change. And typically over time, they're not the greatest overall wildlife habitat. They are the kind of thing that in the winter you might see owls or see, a brown creeper or something poking around on the bark, but it's not a good structure kind of tree for wildlife habitat. So One of the tools we use is timber management. And this is an example where we'll do a commercial timber sale to remove red pines. At Gourdneck, because so much of it is wet and so much of it is not really ideal for having a truck going in and out with logs on it when you're in the city. We don't really have a lot of many goals where we would use timber management. It's primarily limited to removing the red pines and jack pines. One of the other big things we do for invasive species would be like in the prairie fens, like glossy buckthorn. We have Oriental bittersweet in the uplands, all that kind of stuff that's affecting those rare natural communities. So that's a really important thing we do. And then also kind of a weird thing, I guess people have probably heard about removing beaver dams since man has been in North America. I guess we probably battled beavers in some way, but particularly with our prairie fens, which typically occur in headwaters of streams, we have beavers damming those up, inundating the rattlesnake, eastern Massasauga rattlesnake habitat, which is not good for them. It's not good for the plant species. And there was a time when if, prairie fens were all over the landscape, having beavers come in there would be a good thing. They can kill the woody plants. There's a chance for them to be recolonized by those rare plants and animals. But when you're the only game in town, it doesn't work as well. So we're always battling beavers. And the last kind of big tool I'll mention that we use for habitat treatments is prescribed fire. So here you see in the picture an example of a prairie we burned at Gourdneck. And we typically use this in our prairies and savannas, any of our fire adapted communities, so our oak forests. But one challenge we have with the city of Portage is that we're in the city of Portage. So we have to manage smoke. So when we burn, we don't want that smoke going to the city and hanging out there. We don't want it blowing across 131 and causing car accidents. So in the last 6 years, since our first prescribed burn that we had at Gourdneck in 2018, we've had 2 burns. We'd like to have more, but it's just very complex here. So just talk about the tornado a little bit. It happened on May 6th. It took a path kind of parallel to Center Avenue, moving through our northwest and northeast units, and affected about 150 acres. Luckily, I'm not aware of any loss of life to people. I know there's a lot of property damage, and I'm sure there was some injuries because it was a pretty significant tornado through Portage and other areas of southern Michigan. But for us, it was kind of a shock. This area you see here was one of those areas where we had removed red pines to restore oak savanna, and the trees we had left, all the black oaks and white oaks, most of those are snapped in half or uprooted and laying on their side. So in some ways it's a letdown. In other ways, I'm a big fan of natural disturbance. What better than a tornado coming through to do what Mother Nature does. But again, we don't have a huge landscape of forest. This is, the public land that we've been kind of working on making more accessible to people. So we have a balance here to do with these units, particularly on Center Avenue. How do we get people? You can't even walk through this stuff. I mean, it's you can crawl, you can go over logs. It's pretty bad. But again, there's opportunities with the increase in snags, that unique habitat that a root wad being upturned provides for animals. One last kind of negative is with our oak savannas, and we're quite the biotic hotspot for rare plants as well at Gourdneck. There's a potential loss of some species being extirpated from the area if they're just covered with oak trees. So lots of decisions for us. And just to touch on research and monitoring, the stuff I have here is typically a little bit more monitoring at base, I suppose, but any area where you have rattlesnakes or rare plants, things like that, we always have universities conducting studies on our land. So that's fairly common. So our rare plants and animals are well researched, well monitored. The grassland birds like the dick sisal out in our grassland, MNFI monitors those every couple of years and comes out and does surveys. We also have a game area use study that MSU is doing right now, and that's game area use by people, just kind of looking at what kind of users are coming out here, how many hunters we have, how many other recreational type folks are coming out. And here there's an MNFI report for our rare plants, animals, and natural communities that the public can download if you wish to. I think it's 150 pages or something like that. So it's a pretty in-depth report, but that just kind of demonstrates that Gourdneck, not only is it a good hunting area, it's very good for, generalist birding and all these rare plants and animals as well. So because we're in a high population center and we have so many opportunities, a few years ago, we signed an agreement with the city of Portage to kind of help each other where our strengths and weaknesses were. So they've kind of helped with some trash cleanup. As we develop better access, they're going to help with snow plowing, things like that. And then the programming has been probably the biggest thing, where we've had 2 or 3 events every year for like the last 2 or 3 years. We typically have about 25 participants, and they've been called like Hike with the Biologist, Frog Walk. We did a bow hunting one last fall just to introduce people to bow hunting, whether they were interested in hunting or just learning. And those have been well attended. We're meeting all kinds of people from the city, all kinds of local folks. And then some of the things every year we've included one of those events as like an MUCC on the ground kind of event, where we're doing, like in the picture here, it's killing glossy buckthorn in the prairie fen. So that's been pretty neat as far as engaging with people from the public and using what's there with the city of Portage being right there to work together. So because we're in the city, because we're in a high proximity center to people, we're eligible to apply for Michigan Natural Resources Trust Fund development grants. And we were successful at getting 2 of those. The first one is in the upper corner. It's just an accessible parking area with paved ADA parking spots. There's a bathroom. It's in construction right now. I don't have any up-to-date pictures, but we're just getting all the gravel ordered and all of the pieces together. But ultimately, there will be an accessible trail that goes back into the woods that somebody in a wheelchair-assisted device could access, which is pretty neat. The second one we got is this picture. This lower picture is going back to Hampton Lake. So that's a lake right there in the middle of the city. It's good fishing. It's definitely a place that's good for catching some birds in that area. So we'd like to put a boardwalk, fishing and kayak platform, and then also improve the parking area there too. So this is a big thing, right? How are we funded? We are funded almost entirely from hunting license fees. So we're the Michigan DNR Wildlife Division. If you hear wildlife area or state game area and it's state owned, that would be managed by the DNR Wildlife Division. We do use conservation partnerships quite a bit. As you saw with Justin's Marsh, I don't know if I emphasized it enough, but that's managed by Southwest Michigan Land Conservancy. And we often partner with them for land acquisition opportunities in Southwest Michigan. So helping each other is becoming more and more important over time. And with the DNR having funding 90% for wildlife division from hunting dollars, it makes those types of partnerships even more important. I want to kind of point out, I was looking at this, and this is a slide that Erin prepared. I didn't even realize that I'd kind of heard, I know Parks and Recreation Division has huge amounts of funding because obviously there's lots of people using those state parks and state recreation areas, but I didn't realize we were such a small chunk for a big land managing division with infrastructure and dams and pumps and all that kind of stuff. So I think this is just a good slide to demonstrate that we don't get general tax fund dollars for wildlife management. When we do get general funds, it's typically for disease management with like tuberculosis in deer, chronic wasting disease. But so I think this just really shows that when you talk about wildlife and those types of values, there's not a lot of funding out there. So what we do have is limited, and we have to be very responsible with how we use it. So this is, again, I think something that a lot of people by now have probably heard about. Some folks that hunt public land might disagree that hunting is declining, because over time we do tend to see on public land there's still quite a few hunters out there. But with declining hunting, that means fewer hunting licenses sold, which is fewer dollars that we can match with federal funds to fund our budget. You know, the one bright spot that folks talk about quite a bit over the last few years is that there is a growing demographic of hunters, and that's young women. So that's a success story. But overall, the trend of hunting is still going down.
Thanks, Dawn. And yeah, that funding issue is definitely, you know, conservation threat for our wildlife. And it's one thing that we chat about a lot through the My Birds program. And, you know, these are some calls to actions. A lot of folks instantly respond with how can we help? How can we help our birds in these areas? And these are a few ways that currently other outdoor recreationists can help contribute. Purchasing a migratory duck stamp, that really goes towards U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but it helps them acquire wetlands and manage wetlands in their National Wildlife Refuge system. So that still is a benefit to birds here in Michigan. To get some funds towards DNR and the Wildlife Division, you can donate to the Non-Game Fish and Wildlife Trust Fund or the Adopt a Game Area program, though that is, I think, geared more towards small business owners. You can also volunteer to be a community scientist or steward at your local public lands. My Birds posts a lot about those kinds of events. Dawn mentioned MUCC, or Michigan United Conservation Club. They do a lot of great work at state game and wildlife areas, doing some habitat management or installing wood duck nest boxes. And then we also coordinate some marsh bird monitoring at a lot of these areas through the My Birds program and Audubon Great Lakes. You can also support your local conservation organizations and support your local public lands. These are a few upcoming opportunities as well. We'll get these links in the chat here for you. Dawn mentioned that there are some events now in partnership with the City of Portage and MUCC. So August 3rd is a Stewardship Day, which will be co-hosted by MUCC. Lunch will be provided. Registration is required. So we have that link for you as well if you're interested. Unfortunately, the upcoming Hike with a Biologist is already full, but you can keep your eyes peeled for openings. And then other events, as they become available, will be added to this online calendar through Portage Parks and Rec. You can also keep a lookout for future events through Michigan DNR and the My Birds program. And at this point, we will take some questions. So I have a couple that I saved from the chat earlier. And I have a couple of resources as well that I'd like to share with folks. We mentioned hunting seasons, and I wanted to let folks know where you can find that information. So I'll pull that up in a moment. But first, I will get this question out to Dawn. And you did mention it a little bit. But when you go out there, is there a likelihood that folks could get lost? Is there a sign into the area? And we can pull back the map if you'd like to kind of show where those parking areas are. I'm going to pull that up. There you go, Dawn.
Yeah, I would just say, generally speaking, you know, if you're on the Center Avenue parcels, you're going to hear roads. There's quite a few trails. So if you try to landmark your way in, there are not signs. Actually, I think we are getting signs on the Northeast unit. I'm not sure about the status of that for the trails.
Okay.
But in general, most of these areas, you know, if you follow a trail and follow it out, you know, do some landmarking along the way. You're going to be surrounded by people on those Center Avenue parcels. I suppose if you are concerned about getting lost, you probably don't want to walk deep in towards Sugarloaf Lake on the main unit. But the good thing with technology here is you have good cell phone service when you're at Gourdneck. So you'll always have the opportunity to look at an aerial photo, you know, from your Google Maps or iMaps or whatever it is you have, and find your way out. But as far as when you're out there, it's just public land. You're out there on your own. There's no, for the most part, there's no signs out there. And so you just want to be cognizant of that before you head out and let folks know where you are.
And then on this map too, these all the squares indicate marked lots. So Don had mentioned that if you do go in from a parking lot, there usually are some established trails that folks have just created over time. So those would be great places to get yourself started at each of these units. And then additionally, if you want to ask questions to the field staff out there, the wildlife office contact information is at the top of the map. You can either go into the office or give them a call to get some tips on where to go or where to park. So that would be another good tip before you head out if you're not sure where to get started. We had another question. Will any cleanup of the tornado damage be done? Removal of downed trees? Will young trees be able to grow? And will the public be asked to help with replacement of tree cover? Will there be planting days?
Yeah, that's a lot, and we're still kind of finalizing our plan. But the general phased approach we're taking is get the parking lots open, which they are at this point. Then the next thing is trying to get access points open. You know, if you're in a parking lot, can you go somewhere? And so that affects a couple locations, like the Hampton Lake Trail back to that lake is completely covered with trees. So we're looking at a mix of potentially a commercial salvage sale for some of it, just because there's areas that are so covered with trees, if we don't remove them, you can't get through, and we don't have anywhere to put the trees. We can't, there are already brush piles as far as, you know, when you think about benefits for wildlife. So it looks like there's probably some necessity to remove some volume of the trees. But then there's areas too that we think we'd like to leave to let that natural disturbance happen. And as far as planting trees, a lot of the mid-story trees and understory trees are still alive and they're fine and they're doing well. So there's a lot of oaks, there's lots of trees growing. Actually, a lot of the trees that tipped over are still alive too if the root wad is connected to the ground. So we don't expect that we would need to plant trees at this point, but we would monitor that to see how the recruitment comes along for trees in the understory. As far as volunteer type days, it's just a little touchy with, some of those areas are fairly dangerous with trees hanging. So we're looking at our first runs to kind of do with our trained staff and equipment, and then with, foresters and loggers. And I think down the road, I could envision different opportunities for, maybe our stewardship kind of days were scheduled out before the tornado. So I could imagine, maybe next year that we might have a stewardship day that is focused on cleanup for tornado stuff, just smaller scale stuff. So I could see that.
And I can share in the chat or in our follow-up email too, how folks can find out about those stewardship days. Let's see, we have another question as well. From Linda, thanks for all you do to manage Gourdneck. Are there any research projects planned to study recovery of the area after the tornado? And are there any particular species that specialize in populating disturbed habitats?
Yeah, so for the first question is no, I don't know of any research planned. The second question, I don't know if Erin can answer. And there's something called gap phase dynamics that we learn about in ecology, and these types of things that happen. Maybe Erin knows the particular bird species. I mean, certainly there's going to be snags, so woodpeckers and cavity nesters are going to enjoy that. And then those do you have anything to add for that, Erin? The type of species that
Yeah. Birds generally that like scrub or shrub and that edgy kind of disturbed habitat will likely enjoy the area. Indigo buntings are one, spotted towhees or eastern towhees. I'm from the West Coast. Eastern towhees, and a few others like that you're likely to see in that area at this time. Depending on, again, the understory and what herbaceous plants might be visible, that could draw in some other birds too. But yeah, it will depend on what is still doing well out there, but definitely woodpeckers. You might get some pileated moving in there if they aren't there already. Let's see, we had another question. Can visitors bring pets like dogs to hike the trails? Are there any restrictions? There you go.
No, we don't have any official in the spring, and I don't remember the dates. There's like a dog training restrictive kind of date period for nesting, ground nesting birds. So in the spring when birds are nesting, we don't want dogs just kind of running around as they might disturb those nests and the nesting birds. And besides that, there's no restrictions with dogs. But I will say with Gourdneck, with the abundance of development we have and apartments and everything, a lot of people do walk their dogs, and it's just important that we want folks to make sure they clean up after their dog because, we can find compatibility in these different types of uses, but at the same time, we just want to make sure we're not in a place where somebody on a nature hike is stepping in dog stuff. So just be a responsible dog person and enjoy.
Thanks, Don. And then one last question. Does the DNR have an eBird account to track bird sightings by birders hiking there? I don't believe so, but Don, I'll let you confirm.
No, I mean, in past positions that I've had when I did regular bird surveys, I would submit eBird data under my email address and name, but we don't have a specific account where we record bird sightings. So that kind of just drives home the point. We rely on eBird data a lot as well to know what's out there because we don't typically things like waterfowl and water birds, are fairly easy to survey oftentimes. But if we're doing an all bird species survey, that's incredibly difficult and time consuming. So if we're interested in something, we like to check eBird. So that's a good example of relying on the citizen scientists out there that are submitting to eBird.
Yeah, definitely. All right, great. Does anybody else have any other questions? If not, I'm going to move ahead back to our get in touch slide for folks. So you know how to reach us if you want to learn more about this area, the MyBirds program, or how to get involved. You can contact Don directly at that email address or follow MyBirds at Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at these links. Or visit our website at gl.audubon.org/mybirds. I'm also going to drop into the chat how you can sign up for our newsletters to learn more about events like today's webinar and guided bird walks and open houses at a lot of our state game and wildlife areas. With that, thank you all again for joining us. Really appreciate you spending this hour with us. Take care. We'll follow up with an email with the recording and some resources that we wanted to share in the chat today. All right. Thank you all very much. Have a good rest of your day.